I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. Welcome to the Alcohol Mastery Podcast, Session 5. Today, first of all, I'm going to do a question about, somebody asked me whether I was sort of a glass half full person or a glass half empty person. And definitely I've got to class myself in the first one. I suppose in a lot of areas I tend to be too much on the optimistic side, looking at things that are especially in decision making and stuff like that. I think sometimes I tend to be too optimistic about the outcome of things, but I think it's just a way of life. I like doing that, I love the idea of learning stuff and learning new things, and I hate that saying that there's you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think there's plenty of people around who don't want to be taught anything, and they're just so stuck in their ways that they don't want to learn anything new. They're quite happy to sit back and just take what they've got. But I want to learn until the day I die, until I'm on my deathbed. I mean, I once read an English guy, an English professor. I can't remember his name now. He was talking about. He said, if you carry on learning, he said you don't know if you're going to carry the learning through and into the next life. And I think that's an optimistic view. I mean, there's a lot of different religions out there that think. I mean, I'm not a religious person myself, but it doesn't mean to say that I believe that at the end of the day, when you pop your clogs, that you're going to go nowhere, and that it's just going to be a big void. I'm fairly optimistic. So that's, you don't have to be religious to believe in life after death, or something's going to happen after you die. So my optimism is always leading me down the road where I think I'll carry on learning, and maybe I'll take it into the next life. But I like learning for the sake of it. So in this week's Stop Drinking Alcohol, I talked a bit about self-perception, and I just thought I'd talk a bit more about that. I just think there's a whole load of different ways that you can look at yourself once you stop drinking. I think you have to change how you view yourself. How you're thinking about yourself now is probably in terms of your alcohol use. When I used to drink, I thought of myself as a drinker, and I never thought, even when I moved to Spain, I never thought that I would ever stop drinking. And it wasn't, I smoked for years, and I always knew that cigarettes and nicotine and tar and all the chemicals that were in cigarettes, I always knew that was bad. I could feel the badness in it. I could feel myself coughing in the morning. And I knew I was hooked on it. I knew it was a drug. But alcohol was always something different to me. It was always a part of just the whole part of the culture thing. And like I said in the video this week, I'm not using that as an excuse. I think I used it as an excuse once I was drinking. But because we're grown up in those surroundings, when I grew up, alcohol was everywhere. I'm not talking about it just, my father and my parents weren't great big drinkers or anything like that. They didn't, there wasn't times when they went out, and I can't remember if they ever went out as a couple down to the pub. I think they went out to restaurants and did stuff like that, but whether they went to the pub or not, I don't know. I can't remember. Not when I was growing up enough. My teenage years, they never went out like that. And day to day, there might be a bottle of sherry that was in the cupboard, or a bottle of whiskey and stuff, but would hardly be touched. My parents, sort of, it was the family get-togethers at Christmas and all that kind of stuff that my dad would, he'd get loads and loads of booze in, and it was more to the effect of trying to please anyone that came around to the house. That we'd have family coming around at Christmas and friends and neighbours and that kind of stuff. And I think my dad was just being completely hospitable and trying to please everyone. So, there'd always be different types of beer, different types of whiskey. I think if my dad used to love Teachers and Glenfiddich, whatever reason. I mean, I couldn't stand the stuff. I never liked spirits. But my perception of my self-perception of alcohol was that it was completely and perfectly normal. I had no problem with it. I mean, like I say, even when we moved to Spain, and I knew there was certain times when I had to cut down, when I tried to moderate, but I never really thought that I had to quit altogether. I stopped drinking a few years ago, and I stopped drinking for 10 months, and that was basically because I'd been stopped by the cops, by the Gardaí in Ireland, and I was breathalyzed and taken to court, and went through all that embarrassment, and that sort of opened my eyes a little bit. But I stopped drinking for the year mainly because I wanted to prove it to myself that I wasn't an alcoholic and that I could quit at any time. And I also wanted to, it was my job was at stake. I worked in the forestry and I had to drive a long way, so I got around that when I was banned off the road. Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't afford to drink anymore. So, but of course, when you do look at yourself as not an alcoholic, then you don't really look at drinking 15 or 20 pints of beer in one session as being anything wrong. That it's just it's sort of a pride thing with men, especially English and Irish men. And I know there's Australians and New Zealanders that think exactly the same, and Americans, and there's probably people from all over the world that are thinking exactly the same things, that as they grow up, that it is a macho thing to drink a lot of pints. There's this thing about drinking the yard of ale, and being able to see how quickly you can down a pint. And I get that from a young man's point of view. It doesn't have to be with alcohol. It can be with a lot of other things, and we do it with a lot of other things. So you can jump off the highest wall, and so you can, take the biggest punches into the arm. That was something that we used to do, But I never really viewed myself as having a problem with alcohol. I remember saying to Esther a couple of years ago, a year before I stopped, that I enjoyed drinking, and I just didn't want to quit drinking. That there was definitely something to be said for trying to cut down. And obviously I was answering these questions because they were being brought up by Esther. That I was drinking too much, and every time we went out I was getting drunk, and and she's a very caring lady, and she's wise beyond her years, I think some people would say, and I think she laid the seeds and the foundations for a lot of what's happened since. I talked a lot about my son when he came over, and that was the catalyst for me, and it was the reason why I stopped. And but I think there's always, it's brewing in the background. No matter how much you tell yourself that you don't have a problem, I think underneath most of us really know that we do have a problem, that we're trying desperately to figure it out and to try and solve the problem without actually going off the beer or without stopping drinking alcohol. And that's because it's so embedded in our culture. Because, we grew up with alcohol. It was around us all the time. The first thing we wanted to do when we got to 18 or 21 or whatever it was, the legal age, was go in and have the pride of buying your first alcoholic drink. And I think that's one of the big problems with our society, is that we just don't look at it. We don't view it like any other drugs. And there's been studies done all over the world that have been done by professionals that don't have anything to do with the alcohol industry, and most of them are saying that alcohol is more harmful than heroin. I mean, I was completely shocked to find out that there was no physical damage done by heroin. That was unbelievable to me, that there was that a guy could take heroin for life, and there was no actual physical damage. It didn't damage any organs in his body. That it altered pathways in the brain. And when he tried to quit, like if a guy tries to quit heroin, that's when the bad withdrawal effects would start to happen. But that it wasn't the same as alcohol. I mean, there is not one part of your body which is left untouched from drinking. It damages your liver, your kidneys, your brain. It gets into your blood, and whereas with heroin, there's absolutely nothing. I mean, I was reading about LSD, and that's a similar thing, that you can only take LSD for a certain length of time, and then you just don't get any effect off it anymore. So, where with alcohol, you take LSD, and or with alcohol, you start, you drink it, and there's, you just get immune to it. So the more you drink, the more you have to drink to get the buzz. And in terms of overall damage, not only to somebody's personal self, but to society in general, it's the most harmful drug on the planet. I mean, there is probably more lethal drugs that are chemically made nowadays, because they're trying to heighten the buzz as much as they can, to deliver their biggest punch that they possibly can to get people addicted. But when I'm talking about self-perception, I think it's more, it's just in a way that we were growing up. I was brought up first in the UK. I spent the first 3 years of my life in London. Then I moved to, we lived in West Yorkshire until I was 12. Then we moved to Dublin, and I spent all of my teenage years in Dublin. So that's, all my antics happened there, It was, then I moved back to Yorkshire again, where I met my first wife, and my son was born there. And then we moved to the west of Ireland in '93. And we lived in a small little community in West Clare. And, some of these people, it was a beautiful place to live, and the farmers are very simple people. I started, we were looking after a caravan site for a year. Some of the people that you'd meet there were just amazing. Like I said in the video, there was maybe 250 people living in the actual village, but there was 6 pubs in the village. And when you first see that kind of thing, it's brilliant. And the 2 of the pubs had little tiny shops in the corner, so you could go in there and buy your milk and your bread and just your essential stuff. And they charged a little bit more, but that was just the way it was. At least you got what you wanted, just the basics. But everything revolved around these local bars. It was the local bars and the church, of course. Now, I didn't go to church, so I used to meet people in the pub, and it's one of the good times of my life. But it was very parochial down there. It was. I remember an old guy who done a lot of traveling. He said to me, he said, you know, the ones that are the worst here for just being nosy and getting into your business and just having a one-track mind are the ones that have never left the village. I mean, a lot of them have never left the village. You know, they may have travelled down to Dublin for the GA meetings, or they've gone up to the Mart in Ennis, but they spent the majority of their life just living in the village. And you know, the ones that are the most that have gone away and have gone abroad and come back are the most open-minded. And I suppose that's the same thing with everywhere. I mean, when I was living in Dublin, one of my best mates growing up, I knew him from this guy from school, and you know, we sort of went everywhere together. And the first job that I ever had was with this guy. We were selling stuff around doors, and I worked at that for 5 years. But he was just as parochial. You know, he'd gone abroad on holidays and stuff, but he had this hatred for the English. You know, like a lot of the people at the time. You know, it was when I went over to Ireland first, there was Brits out signs all over the place, and I tell you what, I soon learned how to speak with a Dublin accent, and I couldn't understand it. You know, when I was brought up in England, I went to English schools, and we were taught everything from an English perspective. So geography was taught all about England and the rivers and the mountains and all that crack. English history was taught from an English perspective, you know, about the British Empire. And you know, for a small country like England, they achieved some greatness. But then, of course, I went to Ireland, and I was taught sort of another version of this history of their closest neighbour. So I was very confused growing up, you know. But there was a lot of people who just had an inbred thing about the English. I read a book about the north of Ireland called The Sins of Our Fathers, and that was basically talking about people in Belfast and people that would live opposite sides of the road to each other, who were, you know, one side was Catholic and the other side were Protestants, and they just they couldn't stand each other. And it wasn't because they hated the person; it was because they hated what the other person stood for. I went out with a girl from the north, and again, she was from a small village in Armagh, 2,000 people, and they were sort of split evenly down the middle. 1,000 of them were Catholics, 1,000 of them were Protestants, and they just hated the crap out of each other. And it was for no other reason than what side of the line they were born. So John, my mate growing up, you know, I turned to him one day and said, "What the fuck, you know?" It's like, what's your beef with England? You've never even gone over there, you know. So how do you know any English people? So I'm the only English person that you know, and you know, we've been mates for years. And he says, "You're not English, you're Irish." And I was over in England, and I said, "Where were you in England?" And he goes, "Blackpool," you know. So Blackpool is like it's a holiday village, a holiday seaside holiday village. It's this holiday town, I suppose you'd call it. You know, and you can't get to know a nation by going to a tourist area. You know, it's the same as, you know, getting to know the French people by going to France and, you know, going to all the tourist destinations. These people are sick and tired of tourists, and you know, they come across as arrogant, and they come across as whatever. But you know, normal French people are lovely. I know a lot of French people, and you know, they have their own way, but that's just the way of them. It's just you know, it's my perception of who they are, really, that's coming to the surface there, not anything else. So, but really what I wanted to talk about this week was just to try and talk about a few different ways that you can change your self-perception and your perception of other things. Because I really think it's important to try and get away from thinking about yourself as a drinker. I think that's one of the problems when people do stop drinking, is that they still refer to themselves as an alcoholic, that they don't drink because they're having alcohol problems. And I seriously think that, like I'm off the drink now nearly, a year and a half, over a year and a half, and even to think about myself as a drinker anymore just doesn't enter my head. Think of myself as an alcoholic is just there's no way. But it takes a while to get away from it. It takes a while to stop the thinking about drinking. How would you call it now? It's sort of like I can walk into a pub now, and when there's lads around me drinking pints and stuff like that, it's just natural for me to order orange juice. And I never thought I'd walk into a pub. This happens to me now. It's a regular pub that I go into, and I have been doing since before I stopped drinking, obviously. And when I walk in there now, when I used to go to the bar, it was always pint, yeah, and they knew what I was drinking. And I'm sure, there's a lot of people that understand that. Now it's the same thing, but it's just that I get orange juice instead of a pint of Guinness or a pint of lager, as it was over here. And I get 2 bottles of water, and I get a packet of nuts. And that's my order when I walk into the bar. And that's it. That does me for the whole match. 2 small little bottles of water. I think there's maybe a litre in total. I don't even think there's that. 330 mils. So 660 altogether. 2/3 of a litre. And a pint of orange juice. And, that completely... Whereas before, I'd have 6 or 7 pints. All because of the diuretic effect of the alcohol, and because I wanted to get pissed. But where am I going with this anyway? So it's a perfectly natural thing for me now to walk into a bar and order a soft drink. I don't think about it in terms of ordering alcohol. I don't look at the taps of alcohol. I don't look at other people drinking alcohol. There's very few situations where I would be in now where I'd even think about myself as having a drink. Very few situations. And that gets easier and easier and easier the more you go into this, But I think it starts out with you trying to change your perception of who you are in terms of alcohol. Understanding that this whole alcohol thing is because you were brought up with alcohol as part of your life. It's because you were born into that. I talk about this in a part of the book, that when you're born, the first thing that happens to you is that your parents will wet your head with an alcohol. They pop the champagne. When you go to a wedding, they use alcohol to celebrate. It's a big celebration thing, and the alcohol industry loves that. I mean, their one aim is to normalize, and they'll say this themselves, that their one aim is to normalize alcohol use within society. They don't want it to be reclassified as a drug, because as soon as people have that perception about it, as soon as people think about alcohol in terms of a drug, then it sort of breaks the spell a little bit. If you're going to hold up something and go, well, this is heroin, this is cocaine, this is angel dust, this is PCP, this is marijuana, this is blood, that's there. And then this over this side is drink. This is alcohol, but it's not the same as the other stuff. This is what we all use for celebrating, and we all use for partying, and we use to chill out and relax. And that's what we have been inculcated with from day one. That's what we've been, has been driven into our brains. And we never had a choice in the matter. So, it's up to ourselves to try and change that perception of alcohol, and to look at it like it's, it isn't that. It doesn't need to be used as a celebration. We we wouldn't use any other drug as a celebration, to celebrate something, So, that's one part of the self-perception that we need to change. I've a lot of stuff to be talking about that I've got lined up for this, and I'm going to have to do 2 sessions on this topic alone. I think next week I'll talk about some of the motivational books that I've read. There's a lot of different ones, from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, all the way up to a great little book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. But I'll talk a little bit about that next week, I think. One of the most important things that we can do to help ourselves is just to change the way we talk to ourselves. There's a conversation going on in there all the time. And I think when people are having difficulties, a lot of the self-talk is very negative, which goes back to the beginning of this podcast, when I was talking about whether I was a person who thought about things in terms of a glass half full or a glass half empty. And I can't think. I think beforehand, before I stopped drinking, I think a lot of the time I was I was sort of going between the two. I think in certain aspects of my life, I was a negative. I thought about myself negatively, and in other aspects I thought very positively. And I'm sure everyone's like that to a certain degree, to one degree or another. But in terms of self-talk, I really couldn't see myself doing a lot with my life, not as much as I can see myself doing now. And I think a lot of that was to do because I had essentially given up with achieving something good in this life. When I'm talking about something good now, I'm not talking about, having a child. And we moved to Spain, which is something I wanted to do for a long time. My sister had moved over here maybe 11 years ago, and I came over. We used to come over on holidays sort of pretty regularly. If not once a year, once every couple of years. Cheap flights are a great thing, and as much as I hate Ryanair, we were able to get across here sometimes for as little as 40 or 50 euros a person. It was cheaper than getting the train from Ennis to Dublin. But anyway, it's I really wanted to move to Spain. Every time we had to leave here, as soon as we landed here, actually, it was sort of, I had that in the back of my mind that we had to get back onto the plane again, and we were going to, all this living in the sun was going to end, within a week or two. So, and then, gradually as the day came, I would be, I'd be gradually growing more and more sort of depressed with the idea of going home. By the time we got on the plane and obviously landed back in Shannon Airport, it was, I'd be cursing the country and thinking, back to the feckin' rain and the wind, and it was obviously back to work and all that kind of stuff. But it didn't take long to settle back into my old ways and get back down to the pub and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's one part of my old self, which was the negative self-talk sort of got me, and it spoiled the holidays for me a little bit. But having said that, we did sort of plan and make the move across here, and it wasn't something that happened overnight. I had to in Ireland I was working in forestry, so I had to change the way I was making some money, and that's another story. But I managed to do that over over a couple of years. Esther she works in bars and restaurants, so she had no problem over here, and she knew that she'd get a job fairly easily. So to make that move, and especially to leave Sean behind, was a big step. But I was glad that I made it, and that was nothing to do with drinking. In spite of the drinking, I managed to do that. But I think overall, overall, I didn't think I'd ever manage to do anything that was great in my life. I think that, a reason for that, one of the reasons I can think of, is because of the drinking and the hangovers, and the fact that eventually I chose drink over life, sort of thing. I know that sounds a bit sort of melodramatic, but if you imagine that you spend so much time drinking, which is what I was doing, every chance I got to go out drinking was I'd do it, and then I'd be hungover, and like I say, it would be more than a day, maybe 2 days, and I'd still feel the effects, maybe not as bad on the third day, and often it didn't get to that, obviously, because I was drinking. It's like, you don't feel the effects of the hangover if you're drunk. So just one day leads into the next, and I think eventually I started to doubt, to stop even pushing for things, because I knew what was going to happen. I knew that I couldn't do things because how can you make progress forward? How can you plan anything into the long term when a lot of your plans are going to be scuppered because you feel that ill because of alcohol, that you can't move, you can't get out the door, you can't think straight, you can't do anything. So, and then that in turn becomes a vicious circle. So you understand that you can't do these things, and you drink more because you can't do them. So you just carry on heading down the road that you're heading, and it's lethal. Jesus, I'm so glad I got away from that. And because I'm away from it now, I've talked about this before. I know that with the last time I gave up, but it was always with the intentions of going back on drink again. And I've had a few people asking me over the last couple of weeks, how I felt about moderation and going back. And it's one of those things that just, it's deadly. I mean, once you find that the effects of alcohol are wearing off, that your health is improving, your thinking is improving, your brain is not soaked in alcohol anymore, then it's very easy to sort of sit back and go, well, I feel strong now, maybe I can control it. I talked about this in the video, but it's just a false friend. I've read enough on the forums, on different forums, to understand that a lot of people call it the alcoholic voice. It all goes back to the way we were brought up, and just the thing of alcohol in our society is that embedded into our culture and into our psyche as we are, the people that we are, that it's, that this thing is always going to come up. It's really just your mind trying to get back to an old state, because it's a lot easier to do that than it is to try and figure out a new way of doing things. I had the same problems at the beginning. It was just trying to figure out what to do with my life, what to do. And it all revolves around alcohol at the beginning. You're thinking, what the hell am I going to do without drinking my life? How can I survive? It's impossible. I can't go out for meals anymore. I can't go out with my mates. I can't do this. I can't do that. And it's understandable. It's a massive, massive part of our lives, apparently. But not really, not in reality. We make it a big part of our lives, and we make it that it's, it just goes back to the self-talk thing, that we talk ourselves into believing that it's something that we can't do. And we go through this thing in our heads, and we really believe it. I can't remember who it was now, that I watched a video 6 months ago. I'm not sure if it was Tony Robbins or one of these guys. Anyway, this guy was talking about, he was saying that you can, if you can imagine something doing something, then you can do it. No, what he was basically saying was that people say, oh, well, I can't imagine myself doing that. No, it's just I can't possibly ever do that, you know. And he said, well, can you imagine yourself going to the moon? And no, I can't imagine myself ever going to the moon. And he was saying that in truth, you can imagine yourself doing anything. You know, you've got this really resourceful and unbounded imagination, and everyone has it. And there's no limits in your imagination, that you can harness the power of your imagination by transferring those things into your real life, if that makes any sense. So he said, you know, to think about actually going to the moon and try and think about it in as much vivid detail as you can. You know, going through all the physical and the mental training that you would need to do to go to the moon, to become an astronaut. You know, you're going through, you know, that thing that spins around and around at lightning speed and makes you sick and makes your face go all funny. Imagine yourself in that, and imagine yourself being fitted out for a compression suit. You know what that must be like, and having the helmet placed on your head and listening to the sound of your breathing inside the helmet, and feeling how hot it's getting inside the helmet, and, you know, walking onto the platform, you know, taking the lift up into the rocket and opening the door and getting into the hatch and strapping yourself into the seat, and you know, just feeling what it's like for you. And then you're sat in the seat and you're listening to mission control and in your headpiece, and you feel the engines ignite underneath you and the roar of the engines, and all of a sudden you feel the thrust as you're shot up into the air, you know, and you feel yourself being pushed back into the seat as you climb higher and higher into the atmosphere, and eventually you come out of the atmosphere. And then imagine in vivid detail what it's like to be weightless. You know, what it's like to just float around with no weight. And then to imagine that you travel to the moon, and you get out of you land on the moon, you get out of the landing craft, and you sort of doing that weird weightless jumping, walking thing that they do on the moon. And the point behind it was that he was saying that if you can imagine yourself doing that, and you can imagine doing that whether you're a child or whether you're a 90-year-old grandmother, that you can imagine yourself doing all those things. Now, if you can imagine yourself doing those things, you know, why not imagine yourself into a situation where you can do anything and that you can't fail, that there's no actual rules there stopping you from doing it. You know, the whole thing that he was talking about was just the way that we talk to ourselves. You know, the fact that if you try and quit drinking, for instance, and you just go out one night and whatever happens and you get pissed off and you just have a drink, and you know, what does your inner voice, or you, I mean, this is you that's doing it, what does your inner voice say to you? You know, how do you berate yourself and tell you that you're no good? And you know, there's often like an all or nothing attitude. Well, you know, like, I've had a drink now, I might as well. You know, it proves that I'm no good. It proves that I can't stop drinking, and that you know, I'm never going to be able to stop drinking, and I can't control myself. And you know, that's bullshit. It's negative self-talk. But you just as easily as you can do the negative self-talk, you can do the positive self-talk, and it's just a question of retraining yourself. And it's not this big thing that you have to do. It's a step-by-step adjustment. You know, you need to be aware of what you're doing in the first place. You know, be aware that you're making these. You're talking to yourself this way. There's a great book there called by Albert Ellis. I think it's Rational Thinking, and there's a whole movement with alcoholism based around that, based around his teachings. And Ellis was he was around the same time as Aaron Beck, who was the developer of cognitive therapy. And that, these two guys are talking about similar things, that, your thoughts and your emotions and your behavior are all sort of connected. I can't remember that. Albert Ellis was, I'm just looking it up here on the internet. It's Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, or EBT, that he developed. And, it's all about getting in behind that self-talk, especially the nasty stuff. One of the favorite things that he used to say was that I can't take it. I just can't take it, And he was a New Yorker, and he had a very thick, strong New York accent. If you go onto YouTube and listen to this guy, Albert Ellis, I think he's dead now. He's dead for a few years, but the guy's he'd be effing and blinded in some of his therapy sessions. He did stage work, and a lot of stage work, and a lot of seminar work, I should say, not stage work. But he'd be just effing and blinded and saying, "What the fuck do you mean you can't do this? Of course you can. You can take it. Anyone can take doing this stuff. The whole idea is just that we wouldn't talk to our best friends like this. We wouldn't talk to another member of our family in some of the ways that we talk to ourselves. So, it's really something that we have to look at. Watch your own self-talk and become aware of it. That's the first step in overcoming it. I watched a commercial for Dove soap recently. I think it's a few years old, but it's on the YouTube. And at the time that I'm watching this now, I'll leave the link down below, but there's 64 million views on this video. And it's basically about this, a forensic artist from the FBI is doing sketches of women based on the way that they're describing themselves. So he does one, he can't see them. All you can hear is their voices. They're behind this sort of screen, and he's asking them to describe themselves. What their hair looks like, what their nose looks like, what their face looks like, all that kind of stuff. And then he gets other women in who are also doing the same explanations of themselves and descriptions of themselves, and he gets them to describe the other women. And when they were finished, the women were shown their own image of how they saw themselves and how other people saw them, and their own self-described portraits were the least attractive. And there was marked differences. People just saw much more beautiful things in other people than they could see in themselves. So it was just one of those things that why can't we sort of see ourselves the way we are, the way we really are, and why do we see ourselves in this negative light? And it's another thing that really goes back to our childhood, to all those things that we've gone through, and all our life experiences, all the teasing that we go through, that self-consciousness that we go through as teenagers, and the worrying that we go through. There's a guy hammering down here. There's been somebody drilling all day long. This is a tourist time. Why don't they feck off? Maybe they're getting the houses ready for the winter. It's just gas around here now at the moment. It's coming towards the end of August, and a lot of people around here come down from Madrid. Madrid is a lot higher than here. It's on the plateau of Spain, so it's mainly on the plain sort of thing. It's high up, and their temperature goes very high. I mean, even if you go inland from here a couple of miles, the temperature will increase by a few degrees. Where Esther's working, for instance, she works about 5 miles inland, and she come back in the evening, and just you can see that it's been a really hot day. And in comparison to here, we're right beside the sea here, and you get the sea breeze, and it takes a lot of the sting out of the heat. Plus, we're up 4 floors high here, so we get a nice breeze as well. It's the reverse in the winter time, in that it gets a bit cooler here. During December and January, that kind of thing. So I'll have to do a video one day, one of the SDAs. I'll show you around where I'm living and some of the areas around here, because it's really nice and it's interesting. I think we're going to be moving away soon because we need a bit more room. It is classed as a 4-bedroom apartment where we're living, but it's just it's a tourist place that it was built for staying during the summer months, you know, and it's not really built for long-term stay. So, yeah, I think the guys stopped banging now. Anyway, sorry about that. We're going back to the self-image thing. I mean, that video, just take a look at it, because it's very it sort of highlights just what we, you know, some of our perceptions about ourselves. You know, there's it's just something else that is part of our culture. You know, in some areas, body image, when there's I think there's parts of, is it Hawaii, where if you're a big woman or a big man, it's looked at as being something good. That we've got the opposite. We've got this thing where, you know, you can never be sort of thin enough, and you know, it's sad. I've got 4 sisters, and I'm surrounded by women. Actually, I mean, there's a lot of, we've got all the girls have had girls, and all the boys in my family have had boys. So it's just a disproportionate weird thing that's going on. I don't know what's happening. We trying to get some of the boys to have more boys so that you can even things up, but I don't think that's going to happen. You know, it's a great thing. I mean, I love being surrounded by women. It's a nice thing. I'm getting off track again. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, culture can cause a lot of problems. It's not just in terms of alcohol, but, you know, there's a lot of eating disorders and psychological problems that are caused just by body image. You know, I think a lot more men are succumbing to these psychological difficulties, and with eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia and all that kind of stuff, and all because of the way that we're portraying body image. And it's just another aspect of self-perception. You know, it really goes back to what I was saying earlier on about, you know, when you perceive yourself to be a drinker and that you come from a drinking nation, or that, you know, drinking is a normal part of everyday life, then it's very difficult to get out of it, especially when you repeat that over and over and over again to yourself. But, you know, although it is embedded into our psyche, we can get it out of it by using self-talk. And like I say, one of the first things to do is just to become aware that what you're doing, aware that you're speaking to yourself in a certain way, that you're telling yourself that you can't do without a drink, and that you can't go here without a drink, or you can't function, or you can't be a proper part of society without a drink. I mean, it's all bullshit. You know, and it's bullshit that I was just as prone to when I was drinking. You know, it's taken me a long time to try and get away from that, and I'm still not away from it. You know, if truth be told, there's still a lot of times in my life when it does come back to me, and I hate that. But there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is to be aware of it as soon as it happens, and to sort of understand that it is, I know where it's coming from now. I know that it's my upbringing and my culture, and, you know, I know that it's not my own fault. And as long as I don't go back on that and start thinking, well, you know, maybe I could have a drink again, and go back listening to all the bullshit about, I mean, I'm surrounded by it here with wine, and it was one of the things that I used to love, was the glass of wine. And it was, you know, I loved all the snobbery about it, and you know, all the talk. It's just, so that, I mean, for me, that would be easy to go back to that if I let it. But that's never going to happen, you know, because I understand where it's coming from. I think it is that if you can get yourself into that position where you're aware that these things are happening, that these thoughts they're just thoughts, and that you can think something else, really. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to tell yourself that you can't do it. You can just as easily tell yourself that you can do it, and that it is possible for you to do it, and that, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years into your life without alcohol, that it's going to be easier and easier and easier, and your life will be much, much better without alcohol. I keep saying now that I would be afraid of ever having to drink again, because it would completely ruin my life. It would just take me back to that place where I was, and I just don't want to go back there. So I think the ideal situation is to be your own therapist, and that's what self-talk is all about. If you can notice these things when they're happening, if you can cut these cut the self-defeatist talk down to as soon as it starts happening, you recognize it, you're aware of it, and you can do something about it. It's like, if you go for therapy, it's such a complex topic. You've got a complex person who's an individual, who's unique. You've got a complex problem that they have that's unique to them, and then you've got a complex person who's trying to give the therapy. And however that relationship with the therapist might develop, it's never going to be the same. The therapist can never know you. They're always going to see your problem through their eyes and through their perceptions. So the only person who can really deal with your problems and understand your problems down to a T is you. This is, self-talk is all about that. It's trying to understand. And I understand that there is a role for therapy. There is a role for guided therapy. And it's guidance. It's to try and give you the tools that you need to guide yourself, to put yourself through these things and to put the changes in. But the only person that can do those changes, that can make those changes, is you. And it's a long-term thing, and it's not something that you can go once a week to some therapist and they can make everything right. It does take a long time. It's why a lot of diets fail, because people are looking for a short-term solution to a sort of a chronic problem. Being overweight is not about being fat. It's about the food that you're eating and the lifestyle that's made you fat. And if you go onto a diet and it's a temporary thing, and you just starve yourself or whatever, and you go out and get loads of exercise and you drop the weight, but after you've got down to your ideal weight, you go back to your old lifestyle, then you're just going to put the weight back on. It's all about changing your mindset and changing your perception about the way that you're interacting with the world. It's the way that you're eating, the way that you're exercising, and to try and not bring in something that's going to happen overnight, but something that is going to last a long time. It's the same with alcohol. The amount of people that stop drinking, they go through all the pain of quitting. They go through all that discomfort, and they perhaps go through the first month or 2 months, maybe they get to 3 or 4 months, and they feel the health, they feel the benefits, they feel just the new lease of life that they're having. And instead of sort of equating that with being without drink, they try to think of ways that they can reintegrate drink into their lives. And I've talked about this before with moderation, that, once the initial, it's like a dentist once told me years ago that he gets lots of people coming in through the door when they've got pain, but when he says, well, come back in 6 months' time to get a checkup, he said, big majority of these people don't want to come back is because the pain is the thing that's driving them towards getting the work done. So it's the same with quitting drinking. The pain gets to such a level that people start to think, I've really got to do something about it. Whatever is forcing them to make the decision, it's a painful thing to do. And then all of a sudden they go across the starting line, they do their month, 2 months, 3 months, and the pain disappears, and they start to think, well, maybe I can just have the 1 or 2 drinks. So, unfortunately, that's just the way it is with some people. But so really, the therapy, your own therapy, is best done for yourself. I mean, you need the tools. You need to learn certain tools. You need guidance. I understand that, but your best therapist is going to be yourself. I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself when you're quitting drinking is to have a long-term goal that you're aiming towards, because no matter what happens, no matter what kind of self-talk you're giving to yourself, if you've got that long-term goal and you can measure your self-talk against that, so you can say to yourself, well, I'm talking to myself now and asking whether or not I can go back on the drink and just have a couple of drinks. Is that going to sort of affect my long-term goal? And that's what keeps me on the path. Keeps me, there are temptations out there, and because of the nature of alcohol within our perspective, our self perspective, within our culture, within everything, it is going to come back on you sometimes, and you're just going to feel this. I wouldn't say it's overwhelming after a while. You just feel this need to join in with something that is bad for you. It's not going to do you any good. So, to have that behind you, to have something behind you that is the core of who you are now, and this is what you're driving yourself towards, this goal in your life, I think that is one of the strongest tools that you can have in your whole toolbox for your own therapy, for guiding yourself forward. Anyway, I'm going to end this now. We'll talk a bit more about this next week. I've got a guest coming on in, I think we're going to record that next Thursday, but that'll be on the next show. The following, probably session number 7, I think. So, if you have any questions at all, about anything that I've talked about on this episode or, on the Stop Drinking Alcohol video this week, or just on anything at all, just give us a shout. You know where to contact me at this stage, through the website, or you can get in contact with me through Kevin at alcoholmastery.com. So until next week, I'm Kevin O'Hara for Alcohol Mastery. Onwards and upwards.